High on three rocky mesas in what is now northeastern Arizona, the Hopi people have lived continuously for roughly 2 millennia, making their villages among the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America. While empires rose and fell, droughts scorched the land, and foreign powers marched across the continent, the Hopi endured. Their survival was not an accident of geography alone. It was the result of a deliberate, deeply integrated way of life that combined agricultural ingenuity, spiritual discipline, social organization, and a fierce commitment to cultural continuity. Understanding how the Hopi survived. #choosing a landscape of scarcity. The story of Hopi survival begins with an apparent contradiction. They settled in one of the most unforgiving environments in North America. The high desert of the Colorado Plateau receives only a few inches of rain a year. Temperatures swing brutally between seasons, and the soil is thin and rocky. Most agricultural societies avoid such places. The Hopi did not merely tolerate this landscape. They built their entire civilization around mastering it. This was, in part, intentional. Oral tradition holds that the Hopi were guided to this harsh land by spiritual instruction, and that choosing a place of scarcity rather than abundance was itself a test and a discipline. Whether understood as prophecy or as practical wisdom, the effect was the same. A land that could not support careless living forced the development of extraordinarily careful living. Scarcity became the forge in which Hopi resilience was made. #dry farming. Turning scarcity into skill. The single greatest technical achievement underlying Hopi survival is dry farming, a method of growing crops with almost corn is the center of this system, and Hopi corn is unlike ordinary corn. Over many centuries, Hopi farmers selectively bred varieties with unusually long, deep root systems and the ability to send up strong shoots even when planted a foot or more below the surface, far deeper than conventional agriculture requires. Planting this deep lets the roots reach subsurface moisture that would otherwise be unavailable to a shallow-rooted plant. Hopi farmers also mastered field placement with remarkable precision. Fields were sited at the mouths of washes and arroyos, where seasonal runoff from summer thunderstorms would spread out and soak into the soil, effectively creating natural, gravity-fed irrigation without canals or dams. Windbreaks of brush and careful spacing between plants reduced evaporation and prevented sand from burying young seedlings. Multiple small, scattered fields were planted rather than one large one, a form of risk diversification. If a hailstorm or flash flood destroyed one field, others planted in different microclimates and elevations might survive. Beyond corn, the Hopi cultivated beans, squash, and cotton, along with wild-gathered foods, and later added peaches after contact with Spanish missionaries, grafting new resources onto old practices without discarding what already worked. This agricultural system did not just produce food. It produced surplus and predictability in a place that offered neither by default, and that surplus, however modest, was the foundation on which everything else was built. #villages built for defense and permanence. Hopi villages were built atop steep mesas, hundreds of feet above the surrounding desert floor. This placement served an obvious defensive purpose against raiding groups, but it served a subtler purpose too. It reinforced permanence. A village built on a mesa top, using stone and adobe construction, was not meant to be temporary. Old Orabi, on Third Mesa, has been continuously inhabited since at least the 1100s, and by some estimates earlier, making it one of the oldest continuously occupied communities in the United States. This commitment to permanent settlement in a fixed, defensible location meant that knowledge, farming techniques, water sources, and sacred sites could be passed down across dozens of generations without being lost to displacement. Where many societies have been broken apart by migration, conquest, or environmental collapse, Hopi villages offered continuity of place, and continuity of place is a powerful engine for continuity of culture. #a social structure built for cooperation. Survival in a marginal environment depends heavily on cooperation, and Hopi society organized itself specifically to encourage it. Hopi society is matrilineal. Clan membership, home ownership, and land use rights pass through the mother's line, while religious and ceremonial authority is often carried through specific clans responsible for particular ceremonies. This clan system distributed responsibility across the community. Different clans held responsibility for different ceremonies tied to the agricultural calendar, water, hunting, or specific crafts, which meant that the essential knowledge for the community's survival was never concentrated in, or dependent upon, a single family or individual. If one lineage were to be lost, the community as a whole would not lose the knowledge it held. This structure also built in mutual obligation. Clans were expected to support one another during planting, harvest, and ceremonial preparation, and reciprocity was not just a value, but a functioning economic mechanism, smoothing over the uneven fortunes that any household might face in a bad year. In a place where a single failed harvest could mean starvation, a social system that spread risk across many households rather than leaving each family to fend entirely for itself was, quite simply, a survival technology. Religion as a survival system. It is difficult to separate Hopi religious life from Hopi practical life, because the two were built as a single, unified system. The Hopi ceremonial calendar is organized around the agricultural year, with major ceremonies tied to solstices, planting, and harvest. The Kachina tradition, in which spirit beings are honored through elaborate ceremonies, dances, and carved figures, reinforced the values the community needed to survive: humility, cooperation, respect for water and land, and discipline in following the demanding rhythms of dry farming. These ceremonies were not simply spiritual observances layered on top of an economic system. They functioned as a communal calendar that coordinated planting times, redistributed food through ceremonial feasts, transmitted ecological knowledge to the young, and reinforced social cohesion at exactly the moments in the year when cooperation mattered most. A young Hopi person did not need to read an agricultural manual to know when to plant. The ceremonial calendar taught this rhythm through lived, repeated, sacred practice. Religion, in this sense, was infrastructure. #selective contact and strategic isolation. The Hopi encountered Spanish colonizers beginning in the 1540s and later endured attempts at forced conversion and tribute under Spanish missions established in the 1600s. Unlike some neighboring peoples, the Hopi were never conquered outright, and this was not simply luck. Hopi villages were spread across mesas that were difficult to reach and easy to defend, and Hopi leaders were often deliberately cautious, and at times outright resistant, about permitting deep outside influence into their communities. In 1680, the Hopi joined the broader Pueblo Revolt, a coordinated uprising across Pueblo communities in the region that drove Spanish colonizers out of the area for over a decade. Following the revolt, some Hopi villages moved to more defensible mesatop locations and remained notably resistant to renewed Spanish missionary efforts in the decades that followed, more so than several other Pueblo peoples. This pattern, engagement with outside powers when necessary or advantageous, paired with a strong and often successful resistance to domination or forced assimilation, repeated itself over centuries, including later resistance to United States government pressure to abandon traditional governance, religion, and farming practices in the 19th and 20th centuries. This is not isolation in the sense of total separation from the world. The Hopi traded with neighboring peoples, adopted useful crops and tools, and engaged diplomatically when needed. It is better understood as selective permeability, a boundary that let in what strengthened the community while filtering out what threatened its core structures: religion, land, language, and governance. #oral tradition and the transmission of knowledge. Hopi survival also depended on an extraordinarily effective system of oral transmission. Knowledge of farming techniques, weather signs, clan histories, migration stories, and ceremonial responsibilities was carried forward not through written records, but through structured oral tradition, reinforced by ceremony, kinship obligation, and repeated practice across generations. This method of transmission proved remarkably durable. Where written records can be destroyed, lost, or rendered inaccessible, oral tradition embedded in living ceremony and daily practice is much harder to erase entirely, because it survives as long as the community itself survives and continues to gather, teach, and perform. Elders held central authority in Hopi communities in part because they were the primary vessels of this transmitted knowledge, and respect for elders functioned as a practical mechanism for preserving institutional memory across 2,000 years. What remained stable through all of this change was the core, the land base on the mesas, the clan system, the ceremonial calendar, and the underlying values of restraint, cooperation, and stewardship of a scarce environment. The Hopi did not survive by freezing themselves in time. They survived by being selective and deliberate about what changed and what did not, protecting a stable core while allowing the periphery to adapt as circumstances demanded. Conclusion. The Hopi people's 2,000-year survival on the high desert mesas of Arizona was not the product of any single factor, but of a tightly interlocking system. Agricultural techniques precisely tuned to an arid landscape, permanent and defensible settlements, a clan-based society that distributed knowledge and spread risk, a religious calendar that functioned as practical infrastructure for cooperation and food security, a strategic and selective relationship with outside powers, and an oral tradition robust enough to carry essential knowledge across dozens of generations without ever being written down. Each element reinforced the others. Remove the farming techniques, and the villages could not have been sustained. Remove the clan system, and the farming knowledge could not have been reliably transmitted. Remove the ceremonial calendar, and the cooperation required for both would have frayed. In this sense, Hopi survival offers a broader lesson that extends well beyond the mesas of northeastern Arizona. Long-term human resilience rarely comes from a single innovation or a single act of resistance. It comes from building an entire, mutually reinforcing way of life, one where technology, social structure, spirituality, and knowledge transmission are woven so tightly together that removing any single thread threatens to unravel the whole. And so the whole is protected, generation after generation, with extraordinary care.